I wanted to discuss two separate words that have two separate ideas: oralism and speaking or speech. I've noticed that a lot of people will say that the deaf community is against oralism, which means that they're against deaf people who speak, and that they're against the hearing people who speak, and that they're against the English language and many other things that they're against due to oralism. And yeah, the deaf community is against oralism. If you read the book by Patty Ladd, you can learn a lot about oralism as he gives explanations and definitions as to how it destroyed the deaf community. Things really took a change throughout history, and sign language was looked down on. It was looked as less than speaking. Just because we are against oralism doesn't mean that we are necessarily against speaking or using speech. That's just wrong. People who talk and who use their voice, it's totally fine. If they're hearing and they speak, good for them. If they're deaf and they sign, good for them. And there's some deaf people who start to pick up the English language and start to interact with the hearing community, and that's fine too. There's nothing wrong with that. The problem starts to occur whenever you have the attitude that speaking is better than sign language, that using your voice makes you better than someone who uses their hands to talk. Alexander Graham Bell had a quote that said that sign language is fine, but you know that everyone speaks and very few people sign, and you're going to be stuck. So you must jump into the hearing community and you must change yourself. That attitude, that speaking is better than sign language, and that hearing or ones who use their voice look down on signing, that's not okay. And that is oralism. Some people grew up learning to talk and they really enjoy speaking, and that's great. There's no problems with that, none at all. But whenever there's someone who has taken hours and hours to learn to talk and to learn to speak correctly, but haven't taken the hours to learn sign language and have put more effort into speaking, and they just don't care about sign language or learning it or improving themselves because they look down upon it, that's what's not okay. It's time that we all stop supporting oralism. No matter how you grew up, today it is still wrong to support oralism. But to support speaking itself is a totally different concept than supporting oralism. Using your voice and speaking is fine, but believing in oralism is not. I can give you an example. Say that there were a group of deaf people walking on the street and there were some issues. There wasn't anything too terribly bad, but whenever they called in an officer and the officer didn't know sign language. But all of the others did. They all knew sign language. So the officer decided he needed to talk with the group of deaf individuals. So he called in an interpreter, and the police officer continued to talk. Of course. That happens all the time. There's nothing wrong with that situation. There's nothing wrong with the officer being someone who doesn't know sign language. Many of the deaf community have hearing parents and have hearing loved ones that they have seen them use their voice, and they're used to people using their voice, and they have no problems with people talking. It's just when their attitude is that talking is better and that sign language is looked down upon. Whenever that problem arises, that's whenever we have oralism. So you can see how oralism and speaking are different. We need to get rid of oralism and we need to stop supporting it, and we need to say no to oralism. But speaking, it's fine, as long as you never think that it's better than sign language, or that hearing people are better than deaf people, or that speaking is better than signing. We each have our own language and our own cultures, and there's nothing wrong with that. If a hearing person tries to join into the deaf community and they don't know sign language, that's probably not a good idea. And if they refuse to learn sign language, that's a bad attitude, and that's oralism. Sign language and speaking will always be equals. We can never look at one better or worse than the other. It is our duty as deaf citizens of the world to get rid of oralism. To get rid of oralism in all forms. But speaking and hearing people, it's silly to get rid of them.